If I could get everybody's attention, take your seat. We'll begin the meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful Labor Day weekend. It signifies the end of summer, which for me is the end of my active career in that regard. Water gets cold and I'm old. Okay, I'm going to start with a roll call. Greta, could we have a roll call, please? Here.
Here. Here.
Here. Not present. Roger Durling.
Presente.
Nadra Ehrman. Not present. Robin Elander.
Present.
Megan Harmon.
Here.
Mike Jordan. Ed Lundvik.
Present.
Peter Lewis.
Here.
Kristen Miller. Not present. Kristen Sneddon.
Here.
Suzanne Tejada.
Here.
We do have a quorum. That takes me to item 2, preliminary matters and opening remarks and announcements. Let me start with an announcement. I'd like to just remind everyone, or actually just refresh everybody, that every meeting Greta puts onto our packet the State Street Advisory Committee operating principles. We adopted those back in November of 2021. And there are a lot of great things in there up front in terms of, as a whole, for us to be future-oriented and big picture. And I know it's really hard because, in fact, there's so many pressing issues today the council and the community are dealing with, and they kind of get mixed up in here and whatever. But just a reminder that we are the, if you will, looking forward in terms of big picture and being future-oriented. Another thing that it mentions is healthy conflict. Let me stress healthy, because it talks about respectful engagement, minding your contribution, and being an ambassador. That's really important because each of us basically goes back to our respective board, commission, community, constituents, or what have you. And it's very important to remember that what we need to hear from all of you as to what your comments and thoughts are. If you don't speak up at the meeting and then you go back to your board or commission and talk about, I should have said this or that, you deprive us of your thoughts. You deprive us of the ability to basically even say, you know what, I sometimes agree with you a lot. So I just want to remind everybody, help us work together and collaboratively in that regard. And being respectful of other people's opinion, right? And again, maybe you don't agree with the opinions around the table. I don't think we really drool over the types of presentations that we see. I took that as a demeaning comment that recently went out into the public realm in that regard. And frankly, I really like what we did here and the way we've been operating. And again, I just wanted to positively reinforce to everybody, basically, be big picture, be oriented, have respectful engagement, contribute here in the meetings, and be an ambassador, go out there, because this community is actively engaged in the conversation that we're working on. So with that, I'm going to ask, is there any announcements from staff?
Yes, Chair Davis, I have a couple announcements. First, for members of the public, if you'd like to speak during general public comment or during the item that we have on the agenda today, there are blue slips on the back. If you could fill them out and then bring them up to me, and either Timmy or myself can also walk by to grab them. That would be appreciated. I wanted to just quickly highlight a couple things that did happen going into the really the emphasis of the State Street Advisory Committee being the future-oriented committee. What is happening in the long term downtown on State Street and in the general project area. On August 29th, so last Tuesday, Council did move forward with some of the recommendations that the State Street Interim Operations Committee put forward, and the entire council will be looking at different pilot programs to be implemented more immediately. So if you are interested, approximately every month, staff will be going to council and having a conversation on what is happening on State Street today. And I mention that because it is, like Chair Davis was saying, it is hard sometimes, or it's complicated to separate those items, but it's really important that this committee and that the public puts the hat on for the future. What is the potential for the space to be here? And then if you have comments for what it is today, I would encourage you to make those at City Council. And then when we get to agenda review, I'll introduce Jessica as well, if you'd like.
There.
Okay.
Right ahead.
So today we have one item, and the item is focused on the history for transportation downtown, and then the various considerations that we want to ensure we're thinking about as we're thinking about the different design concepts. So Jessica Grant is with us here today. She's from Public Works with the City of Santa Barbara. She's the supervising transportation planner. Really happy to have her here to give this presentation. It was a similar presentation went to the Transportation and Circulation Committee as well. And so really it's an opportunity for this committee to ask questions, or if you have comments or feedback. But the point of this is to gather input before we dive into concepts with transportation included. And so that component, the concepts with transportation, will likely take place during our October meeting. We have October 23rd scheduled. And then I am looking at other dates potentially as well if we need additional meetings around that time frame. Those are all my items.
Good, thank you very much. That takes us to item 2C. That's the approval of the minutes from August 21st, 2023. Are there any changes to the minutes as we have them? Mr. Lenvik? Ed?
Thank you. In reading the minutes, it appears that it wasn't clear that we were given a presentation by MIG. When I look at page 2, Roman numeral 3, agenda items, it reads, State Street Master Planner Tess Harris gave a staff presentation, period. Ms. Harris and Matt Schwacker and Bill Estes, both of consulting firm MIG, responded to the members' clarifying questions. It doesn't say they were given a presentation. I would suggest after MIG Inc. that we add, made a presentation of the current concept plan, period. The plan included a 20 to 24-foot corridor, but did not indicate how that corridor would be used. They responded, yada, yada, yada. So I think it would clarify that we were given a presentation, and an important feature of that presentation was that the design was not all wrapped up in a bundle, and the corridor was still unresolved.
Good. Any other changes to the minutes? If not, could I have a motion?
I
to
will
approve the
make a
minutes?
motion to approve them.
Excuse me, Roger, I didn't hear it.
I'm making a motion to
With-
approve the minutes.
With the changes, Mr. Envik?
My colleague.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Kristen Sneddon. Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Diane Meester Black? Not present. Hillary Blackerby? Aye. Roxana Bonderson? Not present. Roger Durling? Aye. Nadra Erman? Not present. Robin Elander?
Yes.
Megan Harmon?
Yes.
Mike Jordan? Yes. Ed Lenvik?
Yes.
Peter Lewis?
Yes.
Kristen Miller? Not present. Kristen Sneddon?
Yes.
Suzanne Tejada?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Saxon?
Yes.
Minutes are approved. That takes us to item 2D. This is general public comment. These are for items within our purview, but not within the scope of the meeting today. So if I hear anybody talking about transportation, traffic, what have you, right, wait to the end after the presentation. Is there anybody, do we have any slips of people wishing to speak under general public comment?
Chair Davis, we do. And before I go to the members in the room, I wanted to list out the general public comment that was received via email prior to the hearing. So first, we had a number of public comments that were received after our August 21st meeting. Those were from Alexander, Victoria Valente, Nick Kuntz, Barbara Hirsch, Aaron Ashland, Peter Kahn, Jim Marston, and another one from Aaron Ashland. And then we had additional comments distributed prior to this hearing, and those were from Michael Becker, Lynn Tamizian, Mark Sapp, Valerie Green, Christine Bourgeois, John Umel, Steve Fort, Fred Sweeney, Melissa Cunningham, Lily Vincenti, Ed Fuller, Nick Kuntz, Sullivan Israel, and Peter Smith. Moving on into members of the public that wish to speak on items not on today's agenda, we have one speaker slip so far, and that is from Fred Sweeney.
Mr. Chair, thank you. First, I need to compliment you on how you've been conducting the meeting. And I wasn't here the last meeting because I was in Europe, but I came home and watched it all on video, so got myself up to date. I'm going to just read my comments so I can stay within that time frame, I hope. This is regarding the work that was done at the last meeting in the presentation. And I want to say that in my world, you all are doing a master plan. I know that word hasn't been used, but that's really what you're doing. Having done it a few times in my life, you're doing a master plan. And a good master plan needs to identify the items that you need, but also the items that you wish to have. A master plan is a guide. Many master plans are never fully carried out. Issues such as extending a larger area of De La Guerra Plaza towards State Street, it may never happen. I'm not sure if the video, she's going to show just 4 slides up on the screen as I talk. It may never happen, but the plan will cause all to consider circumstances where it could occur and what might be the impacts of such a plan, either negative or positive, on our downtown. De La Guerra Plaza is more our formal living room to our city, unlike the informal gardens of the courthouse or the play areas of Alameda Park, and in my opinion, should engage State Street directly. 2, I also sharing a plan developed by Team C of the 2020 AIA charrette, which I was a member of, which identifies several ways to utilize a much larger arts plaza encompassing the Library Plaza by closing Anapamu Street between Anacapa and State Street. There are ways to provide one-way traffic in the same pattern now being used on Victoria Street to allow for event vehicles to the Granada and not to diminish the pedestrian experience. This sketch recognizes that MTD route may need to stay in place and can be so marked in the street pattern. In my opinion, the Library Plaza is not going to fully achieve its goals until there are eyes on the plaza all through the day and evening, such as outside dining or art stalls or other activities. In summation, now is the time to analyze every component of what might happen in the next 30-plus years with regards not only of how we use this very long arterial thing called State Street,
Fred, if
but
you could wrap
also-
up, we are over 2 minutes. at
okay,
this
and I'm
point.
finishing right now, but all its housing and social challenges associated with such new look at the future of our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any additional members of the public that wish to speak in the room? All right. Any members online?
Yes, we do have members online who have their hands raised. The first speaker is Marilyn Brewer, followed by Nick Kuntz, and then Lorian Davey. Marilyn, I'll unmute you, and you'll be able to speak. One moment, please. Go ahead and speak, please. Marilyn.
Okay. Yes, my name is Marilyn Brewer, and I live at Gutierrez and Chapala, which is relevant to why I want to speak to the personal reason why planning for a downtown shuttle is extremely important, not just for tourists, but for those of us who live here and those of us who live here without a car, or to try to minimize the use of our car. When I moved back to Santa Barbara 5 years ago, I chose to live downtown without a car. And as I said, I'm down at Gutierrez, and I'm 80 years old, so it's a limitation to how much I can walk. So at that time, the downtown shuttle was my lifeline to grocery shopping, to museums, to my dentist, to my hairdresser, because it was that much farther up the street. And when it was discontinued, even after the end of the pandemic, this has seriously impacted my life and limitations on my mobility. And so I'm saying that this is extremely important for residents, as I said, not just for, but it's one of those things that's good for residents, for businesses, and for tourists. And I guess this is, I should speak to the council members on the committee to say that I think this is not just a matter of long-term planning, but something we need to reinstate immediately, as soon as possible, for those of us who live here. I'm not sure I'm going to be around long enough to see the end of this planning process, so I'm asking for action now. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Nick Coons. Nick Coons, I'll unmute you, 1 moment. Nick Coons, go ahead and speak. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, State Street Advisory Committee members. My name is Nick Coons, and I've been a resident of the city for over 50 years. I want to thank you all for your service on this committee. I appreciate and do not envy the challenges of balancing so many competing interests. Today's agenda item is about transportation on State Street from Victoria to Haley, but I want to encourage us to consider a broader scope as today's discussion relates to Lower State Street and the waterfront. If we want to make the promenade more vibrant and accessible to visitors, we need a transportation plan that can bring people from their waterfront hotels and the Amtrak station. I'd also like to know more about details about the proposed micro transit proposal, specifically who's advocating for microtransit. Does the community really want it? And can we see a cost benefit analysis to it compared to the discontinued MTD electric downtown and waterfront shuttles? Thank you.
And the last speaker with a hand raised online is Lorian Davey. Lorian Davey, go ahead and speak.
Thank you. I just, I have one issue I wanted to ask about, but I also wanted to compliment you all on the work you're doing. I think it's developing beautifully, and thank you for all that work. The question I have, I think you must have discussed it somewhere along the line, but I haven't heard it in any of the meetings that I've attended. But I'm just wondering about the incredible costs, lease costs for the little businesses on State Street that are so prohibitive for our local businesses. And it seems like only very large national, international businesses can afford to set up on State Street. It would be nice if it could go back to when I first came to Santa Barbara back in the 70s. Seems like it was almost always all local businesses, except for Penny's. Remember Penny's? But it seems like only huge businesses can afford to exist on State Street now for any length of time. And I'm wondering if, it seems to me this is interrelated to the work you're doing, that small businesses should be able to thrive on State Street. And so I'm wondering if something can't be done to address this problem. I know it's very difficult, but it seems important to be thinking about. Thank you.
There are no other speakers online.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who did take the time to contribute here. That will then take us to item 3, our general agenda item, item A, State Street Plaza Transportation History and Future Considerations for the Create State master planning effort. I'm going to run this meeting exactly as I did the last time. Hopefully it works as well. We will start with a staff presentation. We'll follow that by questions, only questions, not comments, from the committee itself. We'll hear from the public. Then we'll come back to the SSAC and ask for your response. Staff has asked us to weigh in on two posed questions at the end of your staff report, which I'm sure they'll remind us what those questions are. So with that, Tess, you want to again introduce Jessica and go from there?
Yes, so the presentation today will be given by the City of Santa Barbara Public Works staff, Jessica Grant, who's the supervising transportation planner. I'm really happy to have her here today. She's got a wealth of knowledge on downtown and on transportation-related issues. So I'll have Jessica take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm really excited to dive into the topics of transportation. The presentation is basically in three different parts. I'm going to go over a very brief history of the State Street Plaza and how it is arrived in its physical form, and then really the importance of land use and transportation and why both of those it cannot be siloed on its own. They're very much connected. And then lastly, and it's the big part of the biggest part of the presentation, is transportation considerations for all modes to think about for the State Street Master Planning effort, also known as Create State. So let's dive into the history. I'm not going to go for the full transportation history of State Street. We're going to start right in the 1960s. So what was happening in the early 60s is a very vibrant downtown. I would say it was more vehicular dominated. We had two traffic lanes in both directions, on-street parking, narrow sidewalks. This was an image taken during the holiday periods in 1964. What was happening in our community was happening across the U.S., where we're experiencing the death of downtowns in the late 60s, and then the birth of the suburban sprawl. And that's what was exactly happening in Santa Barbara. We were trying to sprawl more in the unincorporated areas. UCSB was growing, and that's when in the late 60s we had La Cumbre Plaza came online. Well, that took a lot of all the downtown activity, and all the activity was then at the La Cumbre Plaza area. And so there was a beautification committee formed, eventually then became like the downtown organization. But it was, how can we get people back coming to the downtown? How can we make it more economically vibrant and appealing? And so basically then from the 70s on to the early 2000s, we saw the change of State Street. And this is just some images in the top right of State Street when it was under construction. And basically what was happening was you removed the two vehicular lanes in both directions down to one vehicular lane. It was a deliberate decision to not have any on-street parking on State Street, and really to just expand that the pedestrian. And it was called, we call it right now as the interim State Street Promenade, but it was called the State Street Plaza, and it was really to compete with the La Cumbre Plaza. So that's where the connection on the State Street Plaza. So if you hear that, that's where it came from. And this is just, again, bird's eye views in the lower left of State Street pre-promenade, and then of how it looked, and again, in its physical form. Because of all the parking that was removed off of State Street, it was also a decision to have all the parking facilities accessed off of the zero blocks, and then the parallel streets, Chapala and Anacapa. And then originally the State Street Plaza was Ortega to Victoria, and then it was expanded down to Coda and then Haley Streets. There were improvements later in the late 90s for it to have some of the look and feel match Gutierrez Street as well. But you'd see that again, for the sidewalk space, it was again roughly about 15 feet plus or minus. And besides the walking area, it was enhanced with pedestrian amenities. So the beautiful, the urban forest where we had more of the concreteness in the early 60s, and then really bringing back trees and canopy to really make it a nice pedestrian environment. So, as far as right-of-way goes, when we're talking about and for considerations for Create State, we have a finite space, and that space is 80 feet. And roughly, that's building face to building face defines that right-of-way area. And again, these were just a pre-pandemic. I just had a Google image from 2012, and this was, again, showing the vehicular lanes in both directions. Bike lanes came later in the early 90s on State Street, and then again with the widened sidewalks. Every block's just slightly different, but that's just to give you a feel of how the space was currently allocated. This is the same block, the 1,000 block. I just, again, took it as an example. And of course, the temporary promenade, as we know it right now, that then spurred the whole master planning and the next vision master planning effort for State Street. So because the promenade was just open for cyclists and pedestrians, we removed the traffic lane striping just temporarily, and of course more of the pedestrian amenities spilled into what was the street area. And then who historically went to downtown? Well, it was a mix, from tourists to residents to workers. And really there was a history of all modes being used to access State Street in our downtown area. I'm gonna put a pause on that. We're gonna dive into all of those. But I first wanted to talk about really the importance of land use and transportation, and really what's going on from a local policy standpoint and also from the state, and why that's important context as you move forward with the Create State effort. So we've had when you think of all the general plans passed, and for those not familiar with the general plan, that is the blueprint for the city and how it will grow. It's typically done in 30-year increments. And I love to read this quote because I always feel that Santa Barbara has always been very forward-thinking in all of the blueprint documents. And one of the items is, and I'm going to go ahead and read this, there is a growing awareness in most communities that the automobile is getting out of hand. This is the influence on the urban scene is becoming dictatorial rather than beneficent. It is in the instrument whereby free rein was given to urban sprawl. With the increase in population on prosperity, the automobile is demanding more and more land for its exclusive use. All the city needs is a few more cars to attain that unhappy distinction of becoming like Los Angeles. So that was back in 1964. So we've had policies around that. So our last general plan, and which is our current general plan, it was adopted in 2011. If you had to have themes of the general plan, it was to have strategically placed growth, increased housing, and then also transportation demand management. So when we talk about strategically placed growth, there was basically the development areas as you see here. And again, there's lots of sub-neighborhoods within these growth management areas. But in the green, that's basically the general plan said, if you're going to increase the density, this is the area to do it. Why is that? So, from a transportation perspective, the areas, again, overlaps for the most part for the in the green areas is defined, again, for that larger downtown development area. What we see in Area 1, that's roughly the central business district, and Area 2 is just outside of the central business district. But that is where you see the lowest trips from a vehicular standpoint. Why? Is because there's lots of options and choices to use different modes in our downtown area, from walking, biking, transit. Whereas if you lived in areas 3 or 4, chances are you're doing most of your travel via car, whether you're getting to work or running errands, etc. So when there was, after the general plan was adopted, and along with that, to increase housing, was the birth of the average unit density program, or multi-use housing. And most of the development that you see here, the red is the higher level densities, and orange is the medium level. But again, it's to foster that growth, because there's already an existing network of choices. This graphics might be a little bit hard to see, but a lot of it too, there was the Cosmont study that you're probably familiar with from 2019 that was done, that looked at for where are all the jobs. And in the downtown area, that's in the orange, that happened to be their study area for the economic report. But roughly 40% of the jobs in the city are in that area. So, and there's about 33% of the downtown workers live within the city, most of them less than 10 miles away. So a lot of it is trying to get, again, people closer for housing and jobs. And what we haven't kept the pace from a local perspective is just with the housing demand. And so that has increased congestion because people are living further away. So that's kind of the local picture side. Now we step into the state realm. And the state has been very aggressive from a housing development standpoint. And so there's been regional housing, or the state needs of roughly about 8,000 units to be developed over the next, I think it's believed it's 2035 is the year. So we're going to be anticipating a lot more density coming into our downtown and city. And yeah, already just in the Create State Study area, I think we have about 200 residential units. There's about 182 in the queue. As far as those average unit densities, we're probably just right around I think it was 465 units that have been constructed already. So that's kind of already what's in the existing that's been done recently. But there's more in the pipeline. So the state has come in and said, hey, if you live near a transit area, and there's definitions for transit of what's qualifying, in our area, it's the MTD Transit Center right at Carrillo and Chapala, and then the Amtrak station. So if you live within a half a mile, just to encourage development, they said you do not have to provide parking for your private property. And so that is both for non-residential, there's a couple exceptions, and for the building of housing units. So we're going to continue to get a lot more development without parking. And that's, again, in the red circle areas is roughly the buffer, which is a good chunk of our downtown, even more than the central business district. Are we completely out of line of what the state is mandating? No, we've already had parking restrictions or that you don't have to provide parking. For example, if you're a non-residential development on State Street, there's no parking required. Why? Because again, it's to increase the economic growth, we have the public parking lots to help with that. And then versus for housing too, City Council, I believe it was 2022, there's also no parking requirement in the Central Business District for housing units. So again, how do we incorporate this future growth without, I'm going back to that quote from 1964, without becoming the mini Los Angeles and having the congestion? And so how we'll do that is with having choices in our network, whether walking, biking, transit. So if you had to take away on this part between the transportation and land use connection is really what we're seeing from downtown, of where it was a place that you would just drive to and leave, is now downtown's really evolving as its own neighborhood. And it's a place where you stay. So downtown is evolving as a neighborhood. And then why is that important? It's important for the economic growth too, because then you have people living full-time downtown to help with the businesses and all the services. Again, with this limited parking that will be provided, little to no parking, what we anticipate will be increased demand for walking amenities, for biking facilities, for transit, to become even more demanded as we go into the future. And when we compare the Create State, the vision principles that have been created over the past year in the check-ins, I would say that the vision principles are very much in line with this evolving downtown. Okay, so that's the second part. We're going to go on to the last part. This is and then the meat of the presentation is the transportation considerations. So now I'm going to go into each transportation mode and just thoughts of before when you have future concepts of for the Create State effort of certain things to think about, again, from a transportation perspective. So, before I touch the modes, I want to talk about the overarching issue. And this is a heat map of collisions in the city. It's of all collisions. It's a 10-year, represents a 10-year of data. And Vision Zero was adopted by City Council back in 2018, and that's to eliminate all severe injuries and fatalities in our roadways. So when we think of designing anything for our transportation network, it's always with the safety lens in mind. And we'll go back to this image. But yeah, and as you can see, if I were to follow up from Stearns Wharf, where we definitely have collision pattern history along State Street. So let's talk about walking. Again, our downtown is very walkable. The downtown was developed where it's basically 500-foot blocks long, so it makes it very easy to navigate. We have, when we did some video counts last year in August, we have roughly about 2,000 people that are on State Street on a daily basis. Again, plus or minus of season, et cetera, but this was just a sample. And what our State Street master plan that was last updated in 2006, it had guidelines, and State Street's one of the big right-of-way corridors in our city with the 80 feet. And what the lower right image is, if you're developing or on State Street, again, it's showing what the 15-foot, where the 15-foot goes in terms of, there's certain purposes within a sidewalk of function. I won't go into all those details today, but it also mentioned in the pedestrian element that said, well, this is what we think is the demand at this time of how, and what you see in the physical form of an adequate pedestrian facility. But it also said, look, the demand's gonna increase over time, and we expect that there would be an increase in the size of pedestrian facilities and amenities. And so I think when you look at future State Street concepts, I would anticipate that you would have much larger areas dedicated for pedestrians, again, in terms of the sidewalk function and the amenities. This was right out of the Cosmont study as well. It's just something to think about too, that the blue dot there just happened to be Paseo Nuevo. They had it as a point in time. We know that the promenade is linear. It's over right now 8 blocks, but roughly it's about a 5-minute walk for, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 blocks represents a 5-minute block or walk. The green is 10 minutes and 15 minutes. So as transportation planners, we have to think about, you're designing the State Street area, but how do people get to State Street? Because not everybody lives on State Street proper. So that's been a lot of our work in capital infrastructure improvements, is improving safety to get to the downtown area. Another thing to think about, and it's actually under construction, it's just an example of one of our average unit density projects that's going in right at Gutierrez and State Street. And again, another way when we think about walking distance before you choose another mode of travel, it's about a 1/4 mile. Again, it all depends on age and ability, and need, but roughly in the transportation world that it's about a 1/4 mile for walking. So how does somebody that just moves in here, they want to get to the show at the Granada, and so it's more than a 1/4 mile. How do we get them there with necessarily not having to be in a vehicle? So again, that's a consideration for State Street. Is okay, you know, you may have the walking, but you need to have other potential modes in place too. So let's get into biking. Our last master plan update was in 2016. We've had some map updates in 2022, but State Street is the spine network. It was very deliberate that was the spine of our overall bike network, and all facilities basically then spur off of the spine. And why was that chosen by the community? Well, I think because State Street is our main downtown of why people want to get there. There's lots of key destinations along State Street. And another thing that's really appealing for why State Street, it's the spine, is because that's the only crossing that doesn't have freeway on and off ramps to get to the waterfront. And that's another very high active transportation corridor for walking and biking and destinations as well. And so we expect that that will continually be demanded to continue to have those connections on State Street. So getting back to the collisions, the Vision Zero again with the safety lens, what we were noticing, and this is pre-pandemic, is one of the main collision pattern that we were seeing on State Street was right turn conflicts. And so the image on the left, it just shows what was basically happening for the vehicle not properly positioning themselves and the cyclists not properly positioning themselves for that conflict as they go into the intersection. And so, again, pre-pandemic, we were already thinking the on-street bike lanes were not the best facility for State Street. And we were already looking at, well, how can we eliminate those right turn conflicts? So I'll touch on that when we think of a couple scenarios. So right now, this is I just happened to capture an image when I was walking out of a meeting one day, and the interim promenade is what you call a little bit more of the free-for-all. There isn't a dedicated facility. It's a shared facility between pedestrians and cyclists right now. Considerations to think about as you move forward for the master planning effort. What we're hearing so far is for cyclists to be separated from pedestrians. And so one of the considerations, there's three, I think in the narrative I may have only provided one, but I'm gonna go over three scenarios with you with respect to cycling. So again, what we're hearing is that there should be a separated cycling predictable facility on State Street. The other option is to still maintain a separated facility, but there's also what we're hearing is to have other potential modes return, either for vehicles or transit. So in the image to your right, it's just again a sketch. This is not a design, it's more the function of, again, separating the cyclists from the pedestrians and either transit or vehicles and doing one lane of travel in one direction. Why the facility is on the left-hand side versus the right, and then this is me as I'm looking up State Street, is that we would eliminate the right turn conflicts of that pattern that we were seeing pre-pandemic. Of course, that pattern went away because we don't have vehicles right now on State Street. So there's another scenario. And what we're also hearing in some of the workshops as well is, well, don't have cyclists on State Street. Divert them to the adjacent roadways, zero blocks. And so for considerations, it's a lot more complicated than it appears, but we'll go through just some of the images. So something to think about if, again, cyclists were diverted from State Street or a portion of State Street, then we would need to have a high-level facility on the zero blocks to get from State Street to then the north-south streets of Chapala and Anacapa. And again, what we would recommend is, again, a separated facility. But the trade-offs with that is either there would be parking removal or travel lane removal that we would need to analyze. What I want to point out is it's not a like-for-like trade for the diverting the cyclists. So the cyclists on State Street, why it's appealing is because there isn't any driveways on State Street like the other streets. And so you minimize all of those conflicts. There's still conflicts at intersections, but that's big to have each block without that extra conflict. So even if you were to have a separated bike facility, again, on this is just an example I pulled from looking at Chapala Street. We're just north of the transit center. This is from Figueroa looking up. But there's a lot of big driveways that would still need to be in place to access businesses on Chapala and Anacapa. And that, again, there was the deliberate decision to have all parking facilities off of Chapala or the zero blocks for access. And so those would all need to be maintained. This is an image of, I believe, yes, Figueroa. And this is typical because that you would see delivery vehicles. Delivery vehicles right now are allowed until 10 a.m. in the morning on State Street, but what happens after 10 a.m.? All deliveries happen before 10 a.m.? No. And so the utilitarian part is really at the zero blocks and Chapala and Anacapa Street. So if you divert cyclists, something you would need to change in those roadways and know that the utility of those streets would need to change. Again, it's just what do you want as the trade-off? Let's get into driving. Is everybody gonna walk? Everybody gonna bike? Everybody gonna use transit? No, you're still gonna need to facilitate getting to our downtown driving. And this is, again, right out of the Cosmont report. I just love how they have just everything, what's sort of like a 5-minute commute via driving or transit, 10-minute, 15-minute. And as you can see, most of our areas and sister regions, just within a 15-minute drive to downtown. You still want to encourage people to come downtown. It's a big, it's to have the economy going for our downtown area. Again, going back to the function, State Street, excuse me, State Street originated again as the drive-through plaza. And there's a lot of, when you talk to a lot of longtime residents, there's a lot of positive emotion tied to cruising State Street via car. And again, it really wasn't it was the cruising street because you couldn't park there. It was to kind of take a look and then you would decide where to park according to where you wanted to go. All the blue dots are just what's great about our downtown is how many public parking facilities flag our State Street area to provide those options. And again, we're always going to have some access to State Street because whether it's a residence or commercial, you're still going to have deliveries, you're still going to need services, all of that still needs to be in place. What's different about our downtown versus other downtowns is a lot of downtowns have alleys, kind of the back of house. There is no back of house for State Street. So it's the back of house is really Chapala and Anacapa Streets providing that utility and the zero blocks. So again, from a driving perspective, what we still anticipate is, yeah, you'll still need to have maintenance vehicles accommodated. You'll still need to have deliveries available to access for State Street. Again, one thing for consideration is a vehicular lane to return. We're only saying one because what we're hearing is for the increased pedestrian amenities. And so that's why we're saying maybe one vehicular lane to return or for transit, etc. Not going to go too deep into this, but because you're driving, you need a place to park. So again, we have the adjacent parking facilities. Who typically parks at the parking facilities? Well, it's customers, employees, some residential, but not that many. I found that interesting right now. So it's basically customers, employees, and there's different things. You want the parking to be very easy, so then people can get out of their cars and shop and go enjoy all the fun of State Street in our downtown area. Employees, one of the things of concern is just for the employees from a traffic management standpoint is really to minimize employees in the peak traffic times. So a peak for us, it would be in the morning, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then the PM peak is 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And so the goal is to not have also employees circling at the downtown area to make it much more predictable to where to go. So how do we do that? The number one recommendation from the general plan was to look at dynamic on-street pricing for the on-street and to really manage parking aspects for the whole downtown area for it to be really successful. Conceptually, what that means is at any given time, depending upon the time of day, there would be a price set that would always ensure, no matter where you are downtown, that there would be curb space available if you're willing to pay X price. We're not going to get into any of the rest of the details today, but that's essentially the concept, and the concept to, again, eliminate, do you want to not be doing the driving, circling, to be more strategic, that you're either going into a public parking facility or that you're willing to pay the price for the on-street parking. Let's go into transit. So transit was a big part of State Street. We had the State Street and Waterfront shuttle that came on board in 1991. These are just a couple of the iterations. We had the trolley that was always decorated, or the electric shuttle that was decorated for each of the holidays. Of course, that's the 4th of July image. And then there was more recent versions of the shuttle in the lower right picture. There was riderships. I think I included in the write-up narrative in your attachment 1. But the shuttle has become a big topic. We already heard it in one of the public comments. We continue to, that will be a continuing conversation to have. Again, because there is going to be less parking for the developments downtown, if you don't walk, don't bike, what's another way to get downtown and around downtown without having to be in a personal vehicle. So we do again anticipate that the demand will increase for public transit. And these are the sort of the themes to be thinking about for the master planning. So here it's really kind of the State Street proper, but even if you introduce a shuttle just to State Street, well, you still need to get to that shuttle And so we really have to look at the overall, the bigger network when we think about that. So these are the items: fleet type, hours and days of service, areas served, and again, with the Vision Zero, the safety lens is what does that look like so people can safely get to and from the shuttle? Again, is that on State Street? Is it on the zero blocks? Is it the parallel networks of Chapala and Anacapa? That's a discussion that this committee will have. Lastly, I wanted to share for one of the modes, it is biking still, but it's bike share. And we're in a pilot phase right now. It began in 2021. We have, the city has hired an operator, B-Cycle, for the public bike share system. For those of you not familiar with bike share and what it is, it's a point-to-point service, and it's really to be used when it's too far to walk to a destination, but too close to drive. And so we have about 260 bikes now in operation. Just since the launch, we've already had about 1 million miles traveled on the public bike share bikes. This is just an example of, different from a collision heat map, it's a heat map of riders. And the bright green, as you can see, we have very high ridership on State Street and then also in the waterfront areas. But we have another maps that it's also going out to the neighborhoods as well. We have approximately 148 docks, because this is an electric bike fleet. It's a docked system. And going from basically the Highway 154 Cayariel to the wharf is the amount of docks we have. Just in the promenade itself is about 68 docks. And so that's another thing I think that, again, that's promising. We're still in the pilot phase, but it seems to be a very good transportation option that for consideration for states, the Create State effort is something to think about for amenities or docking stations. And if they're not on State Street, where would they go? State Street adjacent, again, depends where the bike facilities are. I've already discussed, but the parallel streets again for Chapala and Anacapa, really what the trade-offs would be if cycling facilities were to go to those streets. And another thing we'd have to look at is emergency access as well. Then I also included in the written report is just considerations for the zero blocks to State Street. Really to look at, again, it's always trade-offs of how you want to program the right-of-way. Again, roughly from a building face to a building face, what does that look like? I think there was one of the public comments today, and I think from the last committee meeting is, do you work on stronger connections just off of State Street, for example, to the library or to the Libero Theater? Every block has a key destination, or to the MTD Transit Center. What does that look like? Did you expand the sidewalks? Do you introduce another bus stop location, etc.? Just know that, again, we have a finite right-of-way, and so we just have to look at, well, if we do increase the pedestrian amenities on the zero blocks, that most likely would result in either travel lane removal or parking removal, and again, that impacts some of the utility of those streets. So I haven't forgotten about the 400 and 1300 blocks. I know that this committee had a full presentation that was just, I think, an hour long, just dedicated for the 400 block. of State Street. But it's, again, a very important connection to the rest of the promenade, or does it come part of the future promenade? What do we do with this? And so we currently, we're in the middle of updating our city traffic model update. That will provide us answers to how traffic's behaving now and what we anticipate the volumes in the future to be, given what the anticipated growth is from a housing standpoint and for non-residential. So we're getting in that information. What we're thinking might be possible, again, is to reduce to one travel lane, potential to then increase pedestrian amenities, accommodate bike amenities, etc. Same thing for the 1300 block. 1300 blocks where the Arlington Theater is. Again, when we were, I believe at the last meeting, thinking about different districts in the theater district, again, the Arlington is very much part of the fabric of the theaters. And how do you have a connection to that? So again, we're seeing potential feasibility for one-way travel lanes. 1300 block currently has that in a temporary configuration now. So if you had to summarize all of those and all the modes, what it boils down to is it's an issue of trade-offs. And we have the finite right-of-way. And what we do think is trying to decide where the bike facilities will go really affects the space allocation for the State Street design. So we end on 2 questions for the committee today. And the questions are there any transportation considerations that should be added or modified in attachment 1? Again, it's more of the narrative history that I just summarized today or that you saw on the presentation slides to assist this committee in understanding the trade-offs when evaluating the future preliminary concepts. And 2, is there any transportation modes or issues that you, as a committee, would like staff to expand on for a future meeting? Again, today was just the overview. Really appreciate your time and look forward to good discussion and happy to entertain any questions at this time.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to go around the room and ask if you have any questions of the presentation at this time. And I will start down here and if you don't, just say pass and we'll go on to the next person. Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Almost said Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions. I'll try to keep them really brief. First, I think I understand what a walking facility is, but I don't know what a walking amenity is. What could you give me an example?
Okay. So when we think about a sidewalk, there's different parts to a sidewalk. There's when you think of, I don't know, movies from New York, and you see all the people from New York moving really brisk, that's the amenity, that's called your through zone that really needs to function to get you from point A to point B. Then there's the space of, well, what's going to create a comfortable pedestrian environment? So in this space, we call it the furnishing zone. And that's where you have your street trees. That's where you have benches, your street lights. I think there's still news racks in there, bike racks, etc. Really take up that space, as well as like an outdoor dining space. So those are the 2 main, and then there's also, besides next to the fast-moving through zone, you have the other spot. Pretend this is the building. Well, you don't walk next to a building like this. You need a buffer from the building. So we have a buffer zone for the larger right-of-ways, so you're not forced into the building as you're walking. And so sometimes there you'll see like outdoor dining tables as a buffer, or sometimes on State Street you'll see that the building set back a little bit to accommodate that frontage zone.
Thank you, that's super helpful. And then the next two are sort of related, and I guess you touched on them in the presentation, but I'm hoping to just drill down a little bit. From a purely Vision Zero perspective for this question, just 100% thinking about safety and Vision Zero, would you say that when we think about injuries or potential injuries to pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, it's more in line with Vision Zero to have all of those modes of transportation on State Street, even with any complexities that might arise from that, than to, for example, move cyclists to Anacapa and Chapala? Like, what do you think is safer, having them all in one street? Or that's, I guess, where I couldn't quite get where.
I think when we talk about Vision Zero or how the right-of-way is programmed, it's just to make sure that all modes of travel are under consideration, whether there's vehicles present or not, and to create a safe network. Because we don't want to, if we see patterns of collisions, we don't want to create, usually when we see patterns of collisions, it's like we look at 5 years of data, and then we look at 5 years before that, 5 years before that, and that starts to tell the story. We don't want that to keep telling that story, and so there are certain things that, we would modify. So for the example for State Street is really modifying into probably a separated facility that's on one side to remove like right turn conflicts.
Okay. So I guess what I'm understanding you to say is like one's not necessarily better than the other. It's that we have to plan for whatever it is.
We do have to plan, and I think another important note is when we think about our mode users, the most vulnerable users of our roadway is pedestrians and cyclists, and they're the ones that are most likely to result in a severe injury. Because vehicle versus pedestrian, vehicle versus cyclist, usually the outcome is not good for the pedestrian or cyclist.
Okay. But it would be like functionally possible to safely plan to have cyclists, pedestrians, and a shuttle or trolley on State Street.
And yes, and that's what we would look at, and we would dive into the details of what those particular safety elements would be.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then just one more very briefly, if I may. It's maybe more of a sort of philosophical question I'm interested in hearing from you on. I was really taken with the note that you made that you're seeing from your perspective downtown evolving into more of a neighborhood. I'm obviously certainly seeing that from my perspective as well, living there. But I'm wondering if you could speak to how much you see transportation and circulation as elemental to the development of that neighborhood identity. And I assume from your perspective you see it as critical, but for us, when we think about wanting to create an identity for our downtown, how central do you see transportation and circulation is to the continued evolution of that neighborhood identity?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. I think with a lot of what we're seeing in the developments, and in order to increase housing, and when you look at the amenities going into a lot of the housing developments, it's very amenity limited, very limited in the outdoor space. And so really downtown becomes your yard. And so you need to be able to get around in that and really have an active space, because you will not have that, at least with what we're seeing in the developments on the property.
So thank you very much for your presentation.
Nice presentation, Jessica, and I'll pass.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you for the presentation. And while I'm at it, I also like to thank Tess and Greta Walters for everything you do, not just for this committee, but for the project and the city as well. So thank you to you all. And Jessica, this is a super nerdy question. You use the term State Street Plaza and State Street Promenade. Could you describe what you mean by plaza? Because I understood
Yes.
that plaza is a town square. It comes from platea, the Latin word for town square.
Yeah, so it was called, when you look at the old drawings from the sort of the 70s on, it was called the State Street Plaza. That created really what you see there today in the infrastructure for the sidewalks, et cetera. It was a spin-off, I believe, because of La Cumbre Plaza, that they wanted to compete with the community with La Cumbre Plaza. So then they said it was coined State Street Plaza. So then with fast forward pandemic, the term when the State Street was just open for pedestrians and cyclists, that the birth of the promenade name was that's how it was named. And then that defined from Haley to Victoria Streets. So just different time periods, and we'll probably have a new name coming up with the Create State effort for the future master plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Also, excellent presentation with the history. Thank you. It's actually fun to see you stand and give a presentation. You're so animated, and usually at council, you're at a desk. And
Yeah.
So it's really, really
I like
nice.
space.
So this is great. So a couple questions. One is, how does the Paseo system play into the walking transit? And if it's underutilized now, what could we do to make it more utilized? And how does it fit in with that pedestrian plan?
I'm really glad you brought that up, and I apologize for not addressing that in the presentation. Yes, we have a very strong Paseo network, and a lot of it was created to get people from the parking facilities to State Street. And so what I would see, just as when you look at our walking network, you always have to, again, where you have the State Street lens, but then how do you get people, again, to State Street? The Paseo system is very critical to that, and I think that those would be relooked at for additional probably safety enhancements, amenities. I know that some of the Paseos have had some facelifts next to Lake Granada Theater, for example, but again, what the future look or concepts would definitely, that would need to be looked at for those tie-ins.
Okay. Thank you. I want to keep bringing that up, the Paseos. And then for the three different scenarios for bikes, with vehicular or different combinations, what consideration for different times of day or different days of the week or different seasons even would be the most flexible? Like, are these sort of like chosen and frozen, or are any of them maybe more flexible?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we'd need to dive into the data a little bit more on that. Again, estimate is 2,000 cyclists. Again, that was just a snapshot in time. And it was taken from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Was it 2,000 or 8,000? Because the slide said 8,000.
Pedestrians.
Oh, okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for cyclists, I would say that it's a mix. You have cyclists are the commuting to and from work and to and from home. And then for the errands, so we definitely see spikes in demands throughout the day, and then you would have a spike during the lunchtime area. So I would say it's fairly consistent through different periods of the day. We've also recently had access to big data source regionally with Replica, and we're diving into that, but it's basically tracking of different mode users from cell phones data that might be able to provide us a little bit more of a glimpse, and so we've just recently had access to that. That might be able to provide us a little bit more glimpse of riders throughout the day.
So say, let me follow up there, say it was determined that at nighttime past 8 o'clock, nobody rides their bike, let's just say. And then we would open it to cars. Or on the weekends, it was this type of use or not. Which one of those plans would have like the most flexibility to be able to sort of change the uses on the weekend or the evenings, or if we even went that direction, but just keeping it in mind?
Again, with the safety lens is, yes, all cyclists wouldn't stop right at 8 p.m. So if then it would become a shared facility. And then it's like the Vision Zero lens of how do you create a shared space that's safe. Once you mix in, again, a higher speed and a several ton vehicle versus bike, that's not always ideal for the demands of, given the level of ridership that we see in the numbers.
So I just want to be really clear. There's not one of those where you could see that it would be open on the weekends, pedestrian only, and then during the week it was vehicles. There's not really one of those that was presented.
Again, it's hard to think of concepts without seeing the future concepts yet. At the end of the day, it's always trade-offs, and so that's just, once we start to dive into concepts, it's really evaluating what those future concepts would be.
But that would be possible.
Yes. Everything's possible.
Okay.
It's just,
Okay.
yeah, it depends, again, as a committee and what you would recommend to City Council. And then, of course, how the larger community thinks about that.
And then on the Cosmont study, it had sort of the Paseo Nuevo being the bullseye that everybody's coming to. But say that area, and this is just a lot of people have talked about, like, oh, I wish that was housing. Would that change any of that analysis? That would be people leaving from that nexus point as opposed to needing to get to it, or does this
the
all stay
purpose
the
of the
same?
Cosmont and some of those graphics is just to sort of give you an idea conceptually what a roaming radius would be for the different types of modes. So we could always draw future radiuses, again, depending upon the length, but it was just a starting place to give you an idea.
Great. And then just two quick questions. What about vehicle share? So say downtown becomes a living room and 8,000 people live downtown, say, and they want to leave town ever. What would be the circulation consideration of that direction?
We actually introduced vehicle share. I'm forgetting the years. It was with Zipcar came online as a potential share, but it ended up not being a success at the time in our community, and it was right when you had the boom of Uber and Lyft.
Okay.
And so I don't know. Could it be successful in the future? Potentially. I would see probably car shares maybe are working really well with specific developments where you have a lot of units, or like say a lot of our the cottage workforce housing sites or other sites that could accommodate a vehicle on site for residents to use. I see that potentially happening, but as long as, some of what remains popular is more the Uber and Lyft transportation over that car share.
So if we went that direction, we might want to incorporate drop-off zones and pickup zones specifically for Uber and Lyft. Right now, it's sort of
that would be
free-for-all.
under consideration.
And then last question, with the one-way vehicle traffic, that was going up State Street, facing that way. Does that favor businesses on the east side of the street, say, if that's where the vehicle flow is and that's where the circulation pattern is, or does it, I don't know, it seems to me it would. I just wanted you to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that would be a subjective, depending upon the user.
Ed?
Thank you. I also have a couple of questions. One thing kind of goes through my mind, and I'm not sure, I hope it's a question, but the city has an ordinance which prohibits biking on sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I guess, a reason for that, which is the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you suggest that that could occur on our promenade?
What we would be suggesting, because what we've heard so far for the mix where pedestrians are mixed in the roadway network right now with cyclists, is that there's still friction amongst those road users. And so I think what we're hearing is to have separated facilities for peds and then cyclists in a defined spot, whereas right now it's not defined.
But if it's physical, that impedes the fire department, so on and so forth, I would assume.
And that's something, again, that we would have to look at for the emergency access
Yeah.
and overlap with that. And just generally speaking, yes, there is the ordinance for no riding on sidewalks. Do people ride on sidewalks? Yes, especially you see a lot of the younger users. That's usually a sign that the bike facility is insufficient on that particular roadway.
But the intent, I assume, of the city council writing that ordinance is to prevent the conflict between pedestrians and bikes.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, so
Yes. Yes.
a couple of questions, which I think kind of follows up to what Councilman Sneddon asked, was you identify 8,000 pedestrians per day on State Street. Is that 8,000 per day every day, all day? I mean, there must be some peaks and valleys there which the planners could use as they design this, their improvements. And I would assume the same thing is true for bicycles. You say 2,000 cyclists a day on State Street. Well, I've sat on State Street in the 900,000 block, so on and so forth, and could sit there for 5 minutes and never see a cyclist. Whereas if I went down further, it's, a lot more. So you do have the numbers per each of the three areas we're planning on, and times?
Yeah, we had snapshots for video counts, and that's something, again, that we continue to take. And also another potential source is, yes, kind of the cell phone data, and we're just learning that information source that might assist with the future decision-making for the Create State.
I think it would be valuable for a planner if he was trying to fine-tune something, to know when we got to accommodate the most people and or the least people. So it's an interesting question. The third question I have, which puzzles me, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you can't, but you say, well, we don't really want to put cars on Chapala and Anacapa Street because of, we're loose parking, we got driveways, so on and so forth. But how are you managing that on Upper Chapala, on Delavina, on Bath, whatever, where we've got a lot of bikes on streets with curb cuts and parking? I mean, are we looking at a reason for not doing it now, as opposed to saying we've done it and we can do it?
No, I think that's the short answer is we're always evaluating facilities and bike facilities on all roadway networks. And part of like the Upper Chapala, there's sort of the bypass into the neighborhoods from State Street and Chapala to get into the Oak Park neighborhood, which also serves, there's a certain connection if you look at the bicycle master plan, a little wiggle between De La Vina and Chapala streets, where we do have the higher level facilities there. And yeah, there's more to that, but I can, yes, we'll keep going.
Well, I just don't want, I would hate to think that we're using a certain rationale on our look at Chapala and Acapa, but we use a different rationale a block over or 2 blocks over.
Yeah, and I think what's, again, different for the downtown areas of Chapala and Anacapa are very vehicular dominated because they have all the parking facilities and amenities and access. And so, it's a consideration when you do look at additional bike facilities. Do people bike on those streets now? Of course they do. Are they all ages facilities? Of course they're not. And so that's one thing that unique for when we had the temporary promenade of that we're able to increase the cross section of ages using the State Street where we hadn't seen that before. So, yeah, all considerations, Committee Member Lindvik.
Hillary.
Just following up on that, right, another difference, I assume, about, like, say, Upper De La Vina or whatever is volumes, right? Like traffic, number of vehicles.
Right.
That, you know,
yes,
play in.
there's not, yes, as high in those areas as they are in the downtown proper. So there's a whole formula for what volumes of what the proper bike facility would be on said street.
Thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciate you bringing the Vision Zero piece in. I've been on the Transportation Circulation Committee for like 13 years now, and having that lens, right, has really changed, I think, how a lot of things are done. So my question is, as we think about all these considerations and all the different flavors that could come out of this, from an engineering perspective, I think it's sort of been made clear, right, that what's downtown right now was not designed, right? It just became what it is. Talk to me about when you know, Public Works, engineering planning works on design of a project, of a bike, pedestrian, any type of roadway, you know, facility. What goes into that from a Vision Zero and sort of engineering perspective to make sure that it's as safe as possible? What does that look like? It's not an ad hoc thing, right? So, but what kind of informs that? Because not everybody sees the sausage being made, so to speak.
Yes, I mean, it's a lot of variables that we have to consider, from roadway volumes, collision data. There's lots of potential engineering solutions depending upon what it is, and so yeah, they're not usually like that one size fits all for every street. So it's very detailed, and also looking at best practices which evolve over time as well.
And would you imagine that, you know, State Street, this master planning effort is different than just your everyday transportation facility project in the city, but would you imagine that the way this gets planned, either on a interim or a permanent basis, all of those considerations you normally would use would go into this?
Yes, it's we would look at it through the same lens as whether it's a neighborhood street or a downtown core. I think the significance is because of State Street being our downtown, because it had been the spine is, again, getting really strong networks to and from the State Street area. As we said, a roaming radius before for pedestrians, typically a quarter mile. Before you choose where you're not biking anymore, it's roughly, again, depending upon the user, about 4 to 5 miles by bike. So that's something, again, looking at State Street, we're looking 4 to 5 miles out to make that network really strong to get you to your destinations.
Okay. Thank you.
Ken.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll start with a quick one. I just wanted to confirm in the 400 block, now that you're saying there's a possibility that that could go to one lane, which direction that lane would be?
Again, if it were to match a future, to play with the future concepts for State Street, it would most likely be the northbound going up State Street, again, because of that right turn, to try to eliminate those right turning conflicts.
So even though, public safety has talked about the need to get
correct.
south.
So that's the issue. So again, we'd probably dive into this further, and I know Derek Bailey has been before you for this committee explaining what would need to happen. In order to go down to one lane on State Street, then you would need to change the configuration of Gutierrez Street. So say Fire Station 1 on that's on Carrillo Chapala needs to go down to the waterfront, and they can no longer have that State Street connection. They would go down Chapala, then cut over Gutierrez, and then State Street accordingly. Just one potential scenario. I can't design where the emergency is going to happen. But so what we're looking at is if you remove then the one-way direction on the 0 block of Gutierrez, what does that look like from a traffic standpoint? And are you going to have cars queuing into the intersections where you create another safety problem? So it's always, when we think about it's never like this is what we do. No, it's a domino effect, and so that's what we're analyzing. We hope to bring that information to a future
Thank you.
meeting.
I want to ask about downtown parking occupancy. So, my sense is between the pandemic and the doubling of parking rates, when I see less cars in the lots. And so I assume we track our occupancy. And do we forecast ahead what we expect the parking needs to be 5 years, 10 years, or however far down the road?
We do look at that. I do have Miss Clark who is our downtown manager, plaza manager. She could give you just a brief insight of what that looks like.
Thank you very much, committee members. So yes, we do track our occupancy data. We are down a bit since prior to the pandemic. We're off about peak occupancy during weekdays is off about 20%. It's a bit less than that on the weekends. It's still down a little bit, but weekends have recovered much more, which speak more to people coming downtown for entertainment purposes as opposed to daily commuters. That's really the population that we've seen drop off as people have made the shift to working from home. We just don't see as much demand for that. So we do some forecasting. It's part of our revenue projections each year when we look out and expect to try to determine what our budget is going to be for the coming year and our revenues are going to be. At this point, we aren't projecting major changes to those occupancy trends that we've been seeing the last few years. I think if we were going to get a lot more recovery than that, it probably would have happened at this point. However, we are looking to sort of see how our parking facilities and the parking resources that we have can better accommodate how the uses of the downtown might be changing, particularly a pivot towards more residential development and away from commuter development. So as Ms. Grant explained, future development in these high density areas and around transit corridors is likely to provide little to no parking. And so we do have those parking resources available downtown and the capacity to absorb, some of that vehicle usage as those uses decide to, if people in those residences decide that they want a car, but maybe they don't need it every day, we will have that. So the way that we kind of look at our system is we assume that we right now have all of the parking that we're ever going to have. And we probably won't build more of it, at least not in the downtown area. That just wouldn't be the best use of the land down there. And so we manage it so that those resources are available for the changing needs of the area. And we want to be able to adapt to that and to continue to, provide those resources and make the best use of them. So I hope that answered your question.
You did, thank you. And that's a good segue to my last question, which you might have some input on, which is, there's been a lot of lenses used today talking about transportation. There's safety, there's this bicycle master plan, but the lens I haven't heard anything about seems to be by far the biggest user, which has to do with business and our local cultural institutions. And that particularly if less than 5% of the project area is housing, then the great majority of people using that has to do with business employees, business customers, customers of those institutions. So how do you, we're going to need to, that's going to be an important part of the lens as we look to the future, to the decisions we're going to need to make. How do you stay up on the needs of downtown business related to their employees, their customers, and the cultural institutions?
Certainly, thank you. And that's a great question. So, you know, for us in downtown parking, we're in sort of an interesting position as regards the city because we are the major source for parking downtown, particularly employee parking. And so we have, you know, lots and lots of different companies and institutions downtown that provide parking for their employees in our parking lots. And so we actually have pretty close relationships with quite a lot of the businesses downtown, and we get an interesting view into sort of who's hiring, who might be downsizing, who's moving into new offices, who's looking to move into new offices. I mean, we'll get calls years in advance for some businesses that might be moving downtown. You know, the new UCLA facility, for example, the medical facility in downtown. I think I've known about that for maybe 5 years at this point. And so, quite that long? Probably not quite that long, but since before the pandemic. So, because the real estate brokers will call very early on. And so we have a really good sense of kind of what people are looking for and kind of how those needs are changing. So that's sort of the informal way, is just our day-to-day interaction with our customers. And then, you know, more formally, we do participate in, we collaborate quite closely with the downtown organization. We do stakeholder outreach. We've got a downtown parking committee that's comprised of, you know, people who are stakeholders as well as other interested parties. We meet with them monthly, and also that's a public meeting, so, you know, we take comment there. So we actually have quite a lot of contact and quite a lot of touch points with the community that we use to sort of try to feel things out and see where things are going, so.
And then from the land development side too, as Sarah had mentioned, is we have an idea of what, new businesses are coming online, and again, what the amenities and certain things that they're demanding.
Thank you. Suzanne.
Hi, thank you again for your presentation. I love the idea of having, you know, mixed modes of transportation altogether. I mean, that's what we had before, and it worked quite well. But I think we are all interested in thinking about what could be different and maybe better. And the idea of a purely pedestrian zone, not saying that the whole spine of State Street could be that, but maybe part of it. Is that even a possibility? I know you mentioned trade-offs, that there will be trade-offs to reroute bicycles or, you know, but is that even could that be a possibility to just have a purely pedestrian park?
That is a possibility, and that's, as we explore the future concepts, it's just, again, with the transportation mode lens, if you favor one mode, which is fine, what happens to those other modes to try to tell the story? And is that satisfactory for the community? That will be the discussion.
Right. Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Robin.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for your presentation. So much good information in there. In regards to your questions, number 1 and 2, a few things for future thought process, for data points for us to really ponder as it relates to all of this. I think it would be really important to do a little bit more research on a few things in order to create what we all want to see as a functioning, economically viable, profitable for business district, right? And so in order for us to understand that, I think some of the key things to be able to understand would be, for instance, in our parking garages that Sarah was speaking about, how many spaces are not used on the regular. So how much space do we have access to for additional housing? And then some of the additional ratio of data points in terms of how many pedestrians are walking by certain blocks, what areas have lower and higher pedestrian counts, and how can we potentially amplify the numbers of pedestrians and cyclists, and whether we decide to have cars, but so that we can make sure that those businesses are getting access to the pedestrians that ultimately are going to frequent their business. There are some ratios in terms of how many pedestrians should be near a business to make a business more profitable.
Robin, I don't want to interrupt, but
sorry.
while we're just asking questions
Okay.
on the presentation, could you hold that for your comment
Yes,
section?
and so I'll just ask a couple other questions, is just to finding, for future presentations or for us to evaluate, it'd be good to see how many bike racks are out there, how many loading zones we have, and the numbers of pedestrians versus bikes and cars, to be able to further evaluate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Peter? Questions?
Thanks for the reminder, Dave.
Sorry.
Were you anticipating a problem there? Thanks, Jessica. It was really, really informative. So, couple of questions. Is it possible for shuttles and bicycles to be in the shared space? And I'm just thinking about the 80 feet we have to work with, how to be the most efficient with it. And if a shuttle's there just periodically, is transportation ever willing or able to foresee that possibility?
Short answer is it's a possibility. Again, with the sort of the safety lens is, what would be the appropriate size of said shuttle that would be operating on State Street where cyclists would feel comfortable sharing that space?
Right. So I think that's how I see it too, because I've been in many places in Europe where the cyclists and cars all are in pretty tight quarters, and it works pretty well. But again, it's all about how it's, what the speeds are, and et cetera. Now, the other thing that struck me, and this kind of maybe what Suzanne was pointing out too, is how long has State Street, the bicycle master plan, been in place, and for how many years? And has State Street always been considered the spine? Has that word been used now since its inception?
I would say that so the bicycle master plan has had different iterations, with the first iteration in 1974. Again, when we think of forward-thinking documents for our city, that was one very early on that was adopted. I think everything was always consistent in the narrative for amenities on State Street, again, because of the key destination areas to visit State Street, because yes, cyclists are part of the economic engine too, as well as pedestrians and then other mode choices. So I would say that it was coined as the spine from the 2016 as a result of the robust community effort that was undergone at that time.
Okay, that's helpful. And then lastly, when you were describing the spine, you said you mentioned the freeway connection, but I didn't really understand that solution that the spine was solving. So if you could just expand on that.
Why the connection and why State Street versus another street is when the freeway went in, our grid was disrupted. Where it wasn't disrupted was State Street. Then there was access Castillo Street, Garden Street. Castillo Street, Garden Street all have freeway on and off ramps. And you can imagine that that's not the most ideal situation. That one thing from the pedestrian master plan and bicycle master plan, if you think of conflicts, where are the most conflicts? It's at the freeway interchanges. What's unique about State Street is you don't have freeway on and off ramps when you go underneath the freeway in that location, which makes it a more ideal facility for getting to and from the downtown.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Michael? Okay, so we will, at this point, look to public comment, and I will look to Tess, if you want to conduct the public content here, both in the room as well as online.
Yes, we'll go to in-room public comment first. Just a reminder for members of the public, there are blue speaker slips at the back of the room if you wish to make a public comment at this time. If you could please fill one out and then bring it up to me, I would really appreciate it. We will start off. I have Catherine Vicenti. Catherine, if you'd like to come up to the podium.
Just pedestrians, bikes, and cars, potentially any combination of those. But what we're calling those people who are just
Hi. So my question is looking through the safety lens and learning from other people's mistakes. I know that I've looked online, and I believe what I've found says that the bike-friendly cities of Santa Monica and Boulder require cyclists to walk their bikes on 3rd Street Promenade and the Pearl Street and 3rd Street in both of those cities. And I think that they've done that out of public safety liability consideration for pedestrians. And I would just like to know, is that true? Has anyone, looked to Santa Monica and Boulder in order to use that information for decisions made here? Because I really feel that the commonality, the baseline is that the walking pace is what unites us. And it's what you need if you're going to go into businesses. People seated on bikes are not going into stores, shopping, they're not sitting down eating, they're not going drinking, they shouldn't even be conversing with each other, because if they're riding an e-bike, they can be going 30 miles an hour. I would just like to know, has anyone looked to get a lesson from Santa Monica and Boulder? Are we considering that? No. Okay. I think that's it. I don't think that those are activities that you can safely do from a bicycle, and I think that people could bike downtown, they can park their bikes, they can walk their bikes. It'd be better if they, parked and just walked with everyone else is walking. Then, that's community when everyone is doing, has something that they're sharing. So that's it.
Thank you.
I guess it has a question, but it was supposed to be a comment. So.
Thank you. We don't engage, we don't respond to public comments during our committee meetings, but appreciate the comments for all of the members in the public. The next speaker is Molly Pearson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grant, for the great presentation. I don't have a whole lot, but I'm actually going to
gonna answer some of your questions, the number 1 and number 2 in my comment. Just the second bullet down talks about State Street being a bike facility with separated peds and bikes. And I would, given the Vision Zero context, it just seems very obvious that a recommendation to continue to have bikes on State Street would be the safest. And do the design, whatever you can do to make it a safe situation. Use signs, reduce speeds, whatever. So I think that should be elaborated on a little more. I know that you're not trying to make that decision or that recommendation, but that's my opinion. And the other question was, are there any issues that staff should expand on? I just think safety, we need to look at data. I really appreciated you talking about bikes versus cars and peds versus cars. Who gets injured the most? What are the severity of the injuries? Let's look at some data to see, kind of to make people understand bikes and peds can be in the same place and move through the same place safely. Yeah, and regarding the name, why don't we just keep calling it State Street? Because that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sarah Siege-Slag. Sarah?
You want to call the speaker and the next speaker so they can be ready?
Sure. After Sarah, we have Lee Heller, and then followed by Fred Sweeney.
Hi, my name's Sarah Siege-Slag. I'm actually also a member of the Transportation and Circulation Committee, but my comments today are my own. According to the Vision Zero plan, bikes and pedestrians separated on State Street are the safest option. Everything else, anything else would be more complicated and more dangerous. I am also concerned about what seems to be emerging as this idea about having this single lane of vehicle traffic on State Street. I'll refer to the committee member who maybe assumed that having one lane would maybe favor businesses on that side. I don't want to sit at one of these awesome new outdoor dining facilities a few feet from a Ford F-150. It's idling and they're loud and they've gotten bigger and they're diesel-y, and that's not what I want to do. I don't want children playing in these new play facilities that are being proposed, next to vehicles that have gotten bigger since the pandemic, that are now taller than the average 8-year-old. It's not safe. It's not in a line with, I think, what we really vision. We've forgotten about what traffic on State Street is like with this much additional activity. We do need space for commercial and emergency and delivery vehicles, but we don't need to crowd the street with every private personal vehicle, which are going to block the delivery and emergency vehicles, because there's no space to pull over. So you need to get a fire truck or an ambulance down, but you have all these other vehicles, like bikes, pedestrians can scoot out of the way. Cars have to go to the next block. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lee Heller, followed by Fred Sweeney, and then Aaron Richter.
Good evening, everybody. I was just on State Street trying to partake of a salsa dance class, which is a lot of fun with a street that's closed, watching bicycles ignore the dismount section sign and ride right around the edge of the class. So it is pretty clear, and I think the previous speakers have said it better than I could, that safety really dictates that we find a way to physically separate bicycles and pedestrians. There might be low-tech ways like the bollards that would be easily shifted during the delivery hours that trucks are supposed to be on State Street. As Suzanne, my neighbor, and Dave, my neighbor, will tell you, we've got speed humps now up Valerio, and that's slowing people down, and maybe at some point we could look at physical features of the bike path that would slow down bike traffic as well. But I do think it's important to find a way to keep that bike corridor, because we are also looking for ways to encourage people to use bikes for transport. And if we're eliminating them on State Street, we have a whole new set of problems about where to encourage people to ride to get around town. So let's find ways to manage both populations without motorized vehicles other than electric bikes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Fred Sweeney, followed by Aaron Richter.
Mr. Chair and committee and Ms. Harris, I think I've got this down to 2 minutes, and I'll try to keep it there. I'm here representing the Upper East Association. We did provide you information on a survey that we submitted to our membership in the middle of August. It was responded to within almost a week. We sent it out to over 400 individuals within our membership. We got 165 or 170 responses within a week. And the highlights are, as it focuses on transportation, is that there is a huge concern about bikes, bicycles, e-bikes, etc. The perception is that it's been a Wild West show downtown, etc. Unfortunately, regardless of surveys and other data, the bike lobby did not take the last 3 years to educate and develop a culture of safe practices. We should also note that it's not just the young people behaving badly, but adults that should know better. And I just came back from Europe, where they've had a long culture of learning how to ride bikes. We don't have that here in this country, so that's a problem. The other issue considering safety and a moral obligation is shared by our members is the continuing amount of homeless population, particularly at the point in the evening between twilight and darkness, where they tend to bed down for the night. Much more must be done with that issue. The other last issue that is not only a current issue, but it's the issue of reducing the mishmash of parklets on State Street and getting them down to the 42 inches has been recommended by the Historic Landmarks Commission. And then finally, a couple of personal notes. Trolley on a railroad track might be a really good answer, and have it electrified. That way we have a specific location for those things with specific stops. And then don't forget about the shade side of State Street. That's what makes Santa Barbara so unusual. That's why the businesses on the shade side have always been the higher end. So keep that in mind. And then one final personal note. Policies on all matters needs to be increased on behaviors on State Street. I'm sorry, but the comments we've heard from the law enforcement folks, particularly at one of the latest city council meetings, is not acceptable. In general, city staff needs to concentrate more on solutions rather than presenting obstacles. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Aaron Richter.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few comments. Thank you all for the presentation. This is my first time joining, and I thought it was very insightful, so thank you. I'm a biker. I'm an avid biker. I'm not like a sport biker. I actually bike to get around town. I live on the west side. I use the B-Cycle program all the time. I'm an annual member, and I just want to represent the bike community here. I think that it's great that we can bike on State Street. I think if you want to work out on a bike, you can take some of the other roads and have a more straight thoroughfare. Being able to bike down State Street with the crowds at a leisurely pace is awesome. Honestly, I don't like the idea of a bike lane on State Street. I think that it would create like a speed zone where you wouldn't be able to have kids running, playing on their scooters or whatever. I saw a couple of kids like 3 or 4 years old just playing and dancing in the street the other day, and I thought it was awesome. And it just, like that picture, I took a picture of the kids, and I just realized this would never happen if there were any streets on this road at all. And you get, beautiful trees, beautiful parklets, people hanging out, sitting on the side of the road. You have cars coming up and down, even if it's a trolley, even if it's on rails. I just don't think you would have that same kind of environment at all. And so even if it's, a smaller portion or whatever, just want to vote for keeping State Street open and keeping it vibrant. And I like the idea of a plaza, even better than a promenade, kind of a square where people can come and hang out. So let me see, I have a few more seconds here. Yeah, I think that's all I have. I agree about the homeless situation. Would be great if we could create more, solutions for that. That's obviously takes away from that beautiful environment. And but we want to find creative solutions. So anyway, thank you for taking my comments.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers, members of the public in the audience who wish to speak at this time? Okay, we will move on to online speakers.
3 speakers with raised hands. The first speaker is Lorian Davey, followed by Marilyn Brewer and Heather Deutsch. Lorian Davey, I'll unmute you, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Lorian, go ahead and speak.
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I forgot to press the button. So I wanted to thank Jessica Harris for her beautiful presentation. And it was a kind of an epiphany to me, what she said about the driveways on Chapala and Anacapa. And the reason that was an epiphany to me was because I'm a bikie. I'm also an avid bikie. But I don't think that bikes, people riding their bikes should be allowed on State Street Promenade. I think that, well, I was thinking that it would be better to divert the bikes to Class 1 lanes on Chapala and Anacapa. But I didn't realize about the driveways and all the loading and unloading that needs to be done on those streets. I'm wondering if the transportation people could develop a plan where the bikes could have a lane down the middle of those streets, and then the vehicles, the delivery vehicles, could ride on each side of those streets. And then Chapala would need to be one way, the whole length, its whole length, like Anacapa. But I agree with the comments previously that some of the bike riders just aren't paying attention and aren't obeying the rules. And so even though I'm a bikie, thank you.
The next online speaker with a raised hand is Marilyn Brewer. Marilyn Brewer, go ahead and speak.
Okay, actually, I did speak before and had intended my the comments to be relevant to today's agenda. I was really happy to hear the inclusion of the downtown shuttle as part of the absolutely necessary transport planning. I just want to point out, with respect to the issue of how many different forms of transportation can go up and down State Street, that for those of us who are users, there's nothing wrong with the idea of the trolley going up Chapala and down Anacapa. With the Paseo system the way it is, to get back and forth across State Street from there, that is an absolutely acceptable thing that would reduce the usage on State Street. And I just also want to reinforce the earlier comment I heard about the idea that allowing traffic on a one-way basis, to me, is a compromise that does not work at all. It just ruins the whole point. So even though I think that we can accommodate both bicycle and pedestrian, I think the other forms of transportation should be diverted from State Street. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Heather Deutsch, followed by Jim Marston. Heather Deutsch, go ahead and speak.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and Jessica, for your very useful presentation. I'm the executive director of MOVE Santa Barbara County, which represents thousands of supporters of active and sustainable transportation in Santa Barbara. And while there are trade-offs, continuing bicycle and pedestrian access and potentially transit on State Street is really vital for a variety of reasons. Not only so many that were mentioned today, but it's the only real way to combat climate change while also addressing traffic congestion and the impacts of parking and our ability to provide affordable or just enough housing, among others. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of questions that arose and add to the answers. One question was regarding car share, its viability, and maybe whether it should be on State Street. So as someone who's frequently used car share in other cities, you don't actually want it along a commercial zone. You want it where you live, and it would especially make sense in the parking garages along Anacapa and Chapala. You would never look to drive a car share down a commercial zone like State Street. In terms of Lyft and Uber drop-off, similarly, you have cross streets. There are many mid-block locations accessible via parking lots and garages. And then it also was brought up this question of conflicts between pedestrians and bikes, and why aren't bikes allowed on sidewalks? And in many cities they are, especially in less congested areas. But it's not actually really about the width, sharing the width. It's really about conflicts at driveways and intersections when drivers do not expect someone traveling on a sidewalk to be traveling so fast, which is part of the reason we aren't interested in really, we can't put something safe on Anacapa and Chapala. So thank you so much.
The last speaker with a raised hand online is Jim Marston. Jim Marston, go ahead and speak. Jim Marston, your hand is raised. You can go ahead and speak now.
Okay. This is Jim Marston. I want to thank the speaker for the good presentation. Of course, walking and bicycling are great transportation modes for some people, but we're forgotten about all the people who are elderly, who use wheelchairs. By the way, none of the cabs that I know of and none of the ride shares are accessible for wheelchair users. The MTD shuttles is totally accessible for everybody. And I live downtown, like the other speaker mentioned, for 30 years now. I can't get down to the beach. I can't get to the zoo. I can't get to the harbor. I can't even get to the Amtrak. I've never seen a town with an Amtrak that's not accessible by public transit. I hope that you guys, but also the city council, can find the money right now to bring back the shuttle. Pedestrian mini cabs are not going to work. There's not enough of them. They don't carry enough many people. And the wheelchair pedicabs only have room for one wheelchair and one adult, or one ambulatory driver. So that's all I'm going to say, but I think we need to have the shuttle back. It's been 3.5 years that I can't get around, like the other speaker mentioned. That's why we have trying to attract people to downtown without cars, and yet you can't have a good, vibrant downtown without having a good transit system. So thank you for all your work.
There are no other speakers with raised hands online.
Okay, we will, with that, close public comment. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to weigh in here today. And you've got the questions back up here. I'm going to go around the room again and ask you basically to give your answers, if you will, if you wish. You don't have to, but your wish to input that staff is looking for. I want to remind everybody that we're going to be coming back here in October, really looking at how they've digested and bringing proposals to us. So we'll have a lot of time to weigh in on the pluses and minuses of any particular type of concept. I also want to note that Kristen Miller, who isn't here today from the Chamber, did send us a written communication, which I would hope would get distributed to the full committee so that you have the benefit of her thoughts in that regard. In that regard, we're going to start over here with Peter this time and go the opposite direction. Megan, you're going to be last this time. No questions or comments. Robin? I cut you off last time. Now
Okay.
the floor is yours.
Great. So I would really like to see kind of the ratio of an effective plan that creates the ratio of that car share versus pedestrian versus bike, all of those things that make a viable downtown, and how we can make that ratio work for us and make sure that all of our elements are covered, and find a way. I think the hardest thing that we're going to be able to figure out here is how to create that beautiful design that we're looking for, that flow and safety and sort of that effect, but also incorporate these different elements that make a viable environment for our businesses. So trying to explore that and seeing what data points that we can bring in from other effective pedestrian areas, mall areas, and just business districts that can lend information for us to kind of have comparative information so that we can ultimately make good decisions on what we're doing here.
Great, thank you. Suzanne?
No comment.
Ken?
So going back to some of the questions I was asking earlier, again, I keep trying to think about, when we talk about transportation considerations, what is the criteria we're going to use to evaluate the recommendations we receive? And what's the criteria that we're going to use? What is the criteria staff is going to use to make a recommendation to us about cars and bikes and shuttle and how we handle pedestrians downtown? And to me, I'm looking to economic vitality as something that we have to generate more of downtown. And most of the people who are talking about transportation seem to be talking about using lenses other than that. So they're using lenses of Vision Zero, or they're using lenses of we want to have less cars, or we're using lenses of the bicycle master plan. But in the meantime, 95+% of the activity related to downtown is going to be feeding businesses with employees and customers and our cultural institutions. And we really didn't receive almost any information related to that today. And so it leaves me at a loss to know how to evaluate. I feel like we need more. I myself am trying to talk to more of the downtown businesses. One of the things I've learned in this process is there's a whole lot of people who speak for Santa Barbara businesses who don't really speak for Santa Barbara businesses. And so the only way I'm finding to do this is to go out and talk to people. And there's a big diversity of opinion there as well. So for me, when I think about transportation considerations, I'm going to be looking for what will help me know that we are going to be creating more economic and social vitality downtown. That's going to be how today I wasn't provided with very much information, and it wasn't necessarily the intention of today to help me do that. So if you have other information that can help back up the recommendations that staff is going to come to us with about transportation, I would like to see that. Thank you.
Hillary?
No comment, just kidding. Obviously, this is a big topic for me, and I appreciate that we're having at least this first meeting to focus on this, because it's actually been the biggest source of conflict and public comment and everything, and so it's interesting that people are sort of staying quiet and to answering these questions. So a few things as far as considerations go, and trade-offs and things to think about moving forward. After our last meeting, which I think we all agree was the most productive and positive meeting that we've had so far, this concept of gateways and districts and serving those and having these sort of identity and where are people going, where are they coming from, what does this mean for our cities? So things like, well, my gateway is the waterfront. Well, mine's Carrillo because I'm coming off the freeway, I'm coming from somewhere else. That's really triggered a lot of thought to me as far as what circulation looks like via any mode. Oftentimes in talking about transportation or talking about a specific corridor, right, which is kind of what we're usually focused on in this, is people think about how can I go from, like, in a linear fashion, up and down and up and down. But that's not really how people get around, right? Like Jessica was saying, they come from somewhere else, or even if it's your neighborhood, right? You're gonna walk through a paseo to get to the place, or you're gonna bike from 2 blocks away, and are you gonna be on the 0 blocks, and is it gonna be safe? Or if you're gonna take a shuttle, is the point that you're just like slotting up and down State Street, or are you gonna wind up at the waterfront also? Are you gonna get to different places? Obviously, all these modes have to play together somehow, right? Whether they're on side streets or they're in separated facilities or whatever. Number one thing, it's got to be safe. I think we know the state of the practice for engineering and planning is separating modes is important, and one thing to remember also is cross streets. Right? I don't think anyone is really suggesting, or I haven't heard suggestions that we close cross streets to cars, right? And so just know that we're not just in a tube going back and forth. We have interactions and there will be conflicts. And so thinking about how do we want to set ourselves up for those sort of marginal spaces and transitional spaces, I think is really important for this too, and how it connects. Much has been said about the sort of transit piece, right? And what I've heard in my work life since the beginning of the pandemic is bring back the shuttle for all the reasons like Mr. Marson stated, right? There's no connection to the Amtrak, right? Which is wild. People from out of town who visited Santa Barbara for a really long time have been calling and emailing MTD for years now going, is it back? Is it back? Because I take the train there and then I get around on the shuttle. Unfortunately, the answer is right, no, it's not back. For locals, again, I think I've actually spoken with one of the public commenters about what's the deal. I live downtown, right? Downtown is already a neighborhood. It's already a neighborhood. People were using the shuttle to get around. It wasn't just like a fun thing to take your kid on or a thing to use when you get the cruise ship in, but locals use it, or we're using it. I think there are a couple of things to think about when we think about visions, because we've talked about different vision statements for all of these. The thing that I'm thinking of, and the thing that is sort of starting to gel from the transit perspective, is 2 things that could work in concert. One is the concept of a circulator, a way to get people around downtown, both visitors, visitors from Goleta, visitors from the, apparently horrible Los Angeles that we keep referring to in our planning documents. Wherever people are coming from, whether it's 2 blocks away, it's, within our region, or it's outside of the region, thinking about those gateways, how are they getting in, and then how are they getting around downtown? How are they getting the waterfront, right? This isn't a waterfront plan, but we'd be silly to not think about that broader piece of how people get around. The other piece is, so that's a circulator, right? It could, there are a lot more complicated considerations if it's on the street, right? A lot more safety considerations if it's on State Street specifically. If it's on Chapala and Anacapa, it's a little bit easier, and there are ways to connect that. It's not rocket science. We always did it with the shuttle on farmers market days, for example, when it was on State Street. So that's possible. And I think there's a need there, and we keep hearing from the public there's a need. The other piece is sort of a more on-demand conversation. Some of this has been brought up at council. Microtransit was mentioned. Just that term, I think, is sort of undefined in a lot of ways. The way that I see it defined most often in the transportation industry is on-demand, flexible, generally curb-to-curb or point-to-point service within a specific zone for a flat fare, right? So ideally a shared ride, something that's on-demand in the sense that you could book it on an app or maybe make a phone call to get that vehicle to come to you, pick you up, and then take you the other place within that zone. So maybe there's a stop in the Funk Zone or at Shoreline Park that's going to bring you downtown, right? All those different locations, those areas of interest, points of interest, the mission, getting you down to where you need to go and not waiting for the thing to come through. These are different transportation applications, right? Some people want a hop-on, hop-off experience, right? Some people are like, I'm going to dinner here, I want to get picked up here and go there, and that's it. That could be the same person in the same day, but, for different reasons. And so I think looking at it from that perspective is how I've been taking a look at it. As far as other things to consider for evaluation, span of service, days of the week, right? When the shuttle was running, it ran a lot, right? In the summer, it was every 10 minutes on State Street. It was, from mid-morning into the evening. From a cost perspective, that's more expensive than something that's 3 days a week or, in the summer or something like that, right? So those are some other things to consider. Another piece is, from a comfort and safety perspective, climate adaptation-wise. At the last meeting, we talked about, making sure in these public spaces there's shade, right? Because it's only going to get weirder and worse, right, with our weather, and we need to prepare for that. Thinking about transportation with regards to that, there are a lot of people who do appreciate being able to hop on a vehicle that has air conditioning, or they're not getting rained on, right? And I think we'll only need more air conditioning and more shelter from rain as we go forward. And so that's something else. And then, of course, accessibility. True accessibility. We've talked from the start about universal design. And I think we may have strayed a bit from that, or at least it's been just kind of thrown in the bucket with everything else. And what that really, really means is important. And so I think a reminder to the committee, to folks, to the consultants who are informing that, when you talk about moving people, one, you want to talk about how many people are you trying to move. Are you trying to move 5 at a time? Are you trying to move 30 at a time? Obviously that affects cost, right? If you have, you want to move 50 people, but you need 10 golf carts versus you could have one shuttle doing that, right? So those are some other trade-offs, but the ability to actually have people who have mobility issues use the same vehicle as everyone else. It's not a special vehicle just for them, right? Because that's segregation, right? And so we want to make things as universally easy as possible and safe as possible, not just in the roadway, but are you making people climb up steps to get into a vehicle, or are you having a level boarding surface? It's all really, really important, but that also means you have to design your roadways in a specific way. So you're putting that on State Street, you got to have a curb or something like that, wherever those are landing. So those are other considerations to think of. And I'll just wind up by saying, and thank you for your indulgence, designing for locals is something that we've talked about here, and the visitors will come. I don't know about you, but if you plan to go somewhere on vacation, I don't go, what kind of tourist traps can I get into, right? I want to go and live like the locals do, try to blend in and enjoy what they enjoy and what's useful for them. So I think if we design our transportation system for locals, no matter the mode, it's going to benefit the visitors, it's going to benefit economic development and viability as we go forward. And the curb management piece that people have brought up about drop-off zones on the side streets on the zero blocks especially. I would love to see that come back. There's a lot of sort of interesting technology and work being done around curb management. Well, probably internationally, but definitely in California right now, that would be, I think, is an important part of the plan generally to see for drop-offs and for deliveries and things like that, commercial loading and unloading. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ed?
Thank you. I'm not sure that I can provide any answers to questions 1 and 2. I am, to a degree, really mystified as to how we are going to end up with a plan for State Street. We saw a plan several weeks ago that did not include mobility. And someone is going to have to make a determination as to what that mobility plan will be. We're going to have to raise our hand that we buy into whatever. Bikes, no bikes, cars, no cars. We're going to have to raise our hand, and it's going to have to be counted. And then we will see what happens with that. I think that a lot could happen that we're not going to be happy with. City Council may not be happy with. But the planner cannot design the State Street promenade without knowing what's there. We currently show, or the plan we saw 2 weeks ago, we saw plazas, 2 per block in some cases. In the civic area, there were 4 plazas. You can't have cars or bikes riding down the street and have a plaza that is going to be activated. It can't happen. You can't have kids out there doing a gym class. You can't have anybody out there when you have vehicles, either bikes or cars, on that street. And if we do select bikes or cars, the planner is going to come back with a different plan for us. A different plan that we may not like. We're going to have to like it, but it's not going to be universal or totally accepted. But right now, I don't think the planner should have a pencil on paper until we tell him what's going to happen with mobility on State Street. It is so critical. As an aside, I was on State Street this morning, and I'm there quite often, but I was there this morning, and I was talking to a business person. And this business person was so mad, didn't know I was on the committee until a little later in the conversation. This business person was so mad because they said, we have been ignored. No one is really talking with us. This person was just beyond belief. I was fearful for my dog who was with me. I seriously was. And they say the retail down here has got to be taken care of.
Hey, Ed, I love your comments, but could you answer the question?
I can't answer any of them.
We're going to get to the subject you're talking about, but that's not the subject.
Okay, I can't answer any of those. Out of my hands. Can't answer any of them.
Okay.
I don't know where we're going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kristen.
Thank you. So this presentation gave so many details in ways that, well, I'll start with my positive. It's magical to ride a bike on State Street right now with it just wide open. I'm a big fan of the B-cycle. It's really fun. It's magical to walk on State Street. It's magical to play on State Street. The shuttle was magical. I'm really worried that the trade-offs, some of these trade-offs, may not be worthwhile. And I'm just going to be really clear myself. If we can't solve the State Street for all with the accessibility, wheelchairs, elderly, and young people, then we have failed. I mean, I'm just going to put it, I think maybe even, I think we're sharing the idea there that until we can solve that, I don't know how we move forward. And right now it isn't accessible for all. It's tempting to say it is or could be, but we've heard enough from members of our own accessibility committee telling us it is not, and members of our community saying that it is not, that we can't ignore that. And I think until we have that accessible shuttle, trolley, tram, people mover circulation. I'm the one who talks about microtransit. I'm a big fan of microtransit. You bring up really good questions about, you know, if you had a shuttle that was every 10 minutes, does microtransit replace that? And I'm not sure that it does. I don't know. I just know that we tried to put this in the pilot program because I will speak for myself. I'm so desperately needing to get this question of accessibility answered. It's been too long, and now that we're moving out of, you know, emergency status, it's just not acceptable to ignore it. So I would like to see what the solution for that is. If we can't have that and bikes, or we can't have that and a promenade, then I don't know how we move forward. And as much as I'm such a strong believer in this being a promenade and keeping it closed to cars, like I'm so firmly in that camp, but I can't ignore that it is not accessible for everyone, and we just can't make a plan that would pass if it doesn't have that. So that's something I want information on. With that as an absolute, just from my own perspective, then what are we looking at? So there's that. I would like to see a consideration of, in the flat, flexible, fun category, if it's sometimes open, sometimes closed, which people do talk about, when, how. I think what would be the recommendations on that would be something to come back with, what that would look like. And certainly there are some configurations that just could not be that flexible. So I'm interested in that. As an additional comment, I'm not sure it fits in here or not, but I think a car share program in the parking structures would be worth looking at as we're looking at a circulation plan, particularly if we're talking about housing and making that a neighborhood. Really specifics on locations of drop-offs and pickups for Uber, Lyft, for whatever, for people, for moms dropping their kids off or picking people up. I don't think they are really delineated, and it is sort of like we sort of create lanes. And I had the experience where I had a whole group of drunken 20-somethings trying to get in my car because they thought I was Uber. And I was, no, I'm not. I'm actually here to pick up my 20-something daughter, but not you, group. So it's not clear. And so I think specifics on that would be part of it. Additional comment, if we have one lane for cars, we might as well have two and open it all up. I don't see once we have it for one, and then you have bikes, and then pedestrians are on the sidewalks, we might as well make it easy on ourselves and open it all the way up, or have cars, however we want to say that, open, closed. And then on these plazas, the concept of a plaza, public commenter Fred Sweeney mentioned this, but it's also come up long before even we had this iteration of a master plan, that we have De La Guerra Plaza with the possibility of closing De La Guerra Street. We have Library Plaza with the possibility of closing just that section of Anna Pamu. Maybe those are our plazas. And when we're talking about plazas being squares and being pedestrian only and being no bikes and really a place where kids, elderly, anybody can just be passively without needing to watch your back. And I don't think we've yet seen really a consideration if those are the anchor plazas. And, Paseo Nuevo is a plaza in its way, too. If those are anchor plazas, do we need other plazas? But I also do really want to see, and this is my last thing that I think needs to come back at some point, is if we did do pedestrian only for a block, for 2 blocks, which blocks and why? So again, we're sort of doing this pilot right now because We just want to see, what is that like? Which blocks? Or I'll speak for myself. I feel really strongly that until we pilot it somewhere, we don't know what it's like. But I think that this is a body that will at some point need to weigh in on that. We have a lot of comments, maybe not here today so much, but over time, who just say it's just too long. And we haven't really addressed that, even though we have like the zones we talked about. I think it would be important to make a proposal of, we think this one block or these 2 blocks and why, based on that data of who's using the plaza, when, what are the shopping times, what are the family times, that kind of thing. I'm such a big believer in the cars not being on State Street, and even for the full length of it, but just to highlight, very, very concerned if we cannot answer this accessibility question relatively soon. I think it will be hard for there to be community support beyond that, and it worries me.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you. I have to pick up my daughter in 2 minutes, so I'll be really quick. I would encourage each of us, if you haven't already or you weren't there, watch the 2 and 4 conversation at City Council from last week. I think it touched on a lot of these, and this all leads to answering those 2 questions. And Councilmember Sneddon talked about the time restrictions. I 100% agree, and that's something that I can work with you on, Jessica, on the big data, to figure out where and when. And in my opinion, and what I was telling my computer monitor during the council meeting was, don't close a block to bikes just because there may be some events in the future. We can accommodate the bikes, and then we can close a block if there is an event that requires it to be closed to bikes. So accommodate, and then do the minimum, not the maximum there. Also, we talked about related to that, and I think this is something that MIG kind of is a little bit at fault for, is every rendering we see is always Fiesta weekend, and that's not reality. If you go outside and walk up and down State Street, it is not Fiesta weekend. It is not super busy all the time. There is plenty of space. 80 feet is more than enough space to accommodate people moving by different modes. And again, when it is Fiesta weekend, if the demand dictates it, then we can knock it down to pedestrians only. Also, as Hillary mentioned, we always talk about planning for locals. We did receive a public comment letter today that had survey results, part of it, and they surveyed bicyclists on State Street, and I think the result was something about 90% of them were local. So if we're planning for locals, that's a lot of locals, and we can also dig into the big data to look for that. So to answer number 1, deep dive into the big data. Plus, I would like to see, you had a safety heat map. Perhaps we could turn that into a table, like before and after closure, to see how safety has changed. And then is there anything else that we should be considering? I think if we said no bicycles on State Street, it would be so hard to enforce unless you wanted to put a fence at the end of every block. If there's demand, people are going to do it. And it had me thinking of the Beachway along Cabrillo. You get bicycles, you get pedestrians, you get roller skaters, you get skateboarders, all on there. So if there's wheels, they should at least be considered in the process. And like for once, I thought if there is a bike facility down State Street, that it's some type of texture that would kind of promote slower speeds. Though that probably doesn't work with a skateboard or roller skates. So just a little bit of consideration to, you are going to have people, whether you allow them or not, who are going to come down on different types of wheeled devices. And then finally, I would just say that community is diversity and coexistence of that we can all get along and figure out how to do it and do it safely. That's all.
Thank you. Megan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm going to
be really brief because the two main considerations that I'd been thinking about have already been discussed by multiple people. I mean, first, I would just say, again, how much I appreciate this and that this is the start of obviously a much longer conversation. This is in no way my area of expertise. So to have this learning for us and to really ground us and sort of frame the start of the conversation, for me personally is really important, and I think will be useful not only obviously here, but in the other contexts where we're talking about State Street. So I appreciate that. For me, the two considerations that came up, or things that I would like us to consider in the future, I guess, per these questions, over and over. The first, as was said, accessibility. The primary for me is, that's the one thing that I felt really should have or needs to be centered, and is something that I want to center, talking about our elderly residents, our differently abled residents, our youth, the kids. Like, how do we ensure that access? I mean, exactly what Councilmember Sneddon said and multiple others. Like, this, to me, has to be at the heart of all our plans, but certainly at the heart of our transportation and circulation plan. So if we can include not only that as a consideration, I guess, but really center that and foreground it, I think that would be, that is something that's really important and critical to me. And then the second consideration, I had similar questions, questions maybe is the right word, as our vice chair did. And I think that's what I was trying to get at with my question about how transportation and circulation plays a role in the evolution and continual defining and redefining of neighborhoods. Like, to me, there's this whole element of economic and social vitality that clearly is implicated vis-a-vis our transportation and circulation plan. And I don't have the answers about how we bring in those considerations, whether it's different stakeholders or, I don't know. I wish I did have that answer, but that was something that I think for me will be really helpful as we move forward to define what this looks like. What's the interplay going to be between this transportation and circulation plan and the broader economic and social fabric of what we're trying to build in this downtown? And I think that's a consideration. Obviously today it was a lot about the technical stuff and the history, but that sort of 50,000 foot meta level of how does this work together, and then how can we get information about bringing those elements into this, what is a quite technical conversation, will be important to me as we move forward. So those are the two main things. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think all the comments have covered the items that I wanted to talk about. I was really moved by Fred Sweeney's comments of looking at what we need to have as well as what we wish to have. And those are two things which, again, looking into the future, we've spent a lot of time talking about what we need to have and answering the questions of today. And I think 10 years from now, those questions will have changed. I think the one area that I think, again, it's been mentioned, microtransit, transportation on demand is going to change over that next 10 years for sure. I mean, you're going to have self-driving vehicles probably in 10 years dropping people off all around town. MTD may be running, so, I won't say that because Teamsters won't like it, but so again, I appreciate all the comments that have been there. I'd like to say that MTD internally is talking about bringing the circulator back sooner rather than later. So there are internal conversations going on in that regard. And I'd really like to have the staff meet with MTD to talk about the future of microtransit, bringing the neighborhoods, the Mesa, Upper San Roque, being able to bring those people downtown through microtransit. So having those discussions would be very interesting. I also want to hear what did Transportation Circulation Committee say? What were their ideas? What were their direction? They're our expert people. I'd really like to have that fed back to this committee so we have their thoughts in that regard, as well as DACA in terms of accessibility. I think those are key elements I'd like to see more of. So, Jessica, great presentation. Thank you for that. It's great beginning to a really, I think, interesting conversation next month in that regard. So, again, if there's nothing else here, right? Tess, anything else? Any announcements? Yeah.
So Our next meeting is scheduled for October 23rd. I will be in touch with the committee if we do move forward with scheduling another meeting in advance of that. We have had some internal discussion about scheduling site visits for anybody interested on the SSAC to do a bike type tour or walking type tour downtown, just to really get thinking differently in the space. We could also do it, from a vehicle or shuttle as well. So that is in play right now. I will reach out via email with more information on that, but otherwise stay tuned and please do hold October 23rd on your calendar.
So just to be clear, there is not a scheduled meeting right now on October 9th?
No, there is not a scheduled meeting. So initially we had talked about October 9th as a potential meeting during the last meeting. We did not end up scheduling that meeting. We scheduled this meeting and then have waited on scheduling another meeting until I can find the right date.
Good, okay.
And we may end up with moving. I do anticipate that October 23rd would be the time frame that the MIG team would come back with concepts, including the transportation component. I don't anticipate that occurring prior to that date. So if we do meet it ahead of that, it might be to answer some of the questions that came up during today's meeting or some other items related to the master plan.
Great. Good, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and I will adjourn the meeting and see you all next month, if not before.